Hi, I'm host of the Law and Finance Show, and today we have a great guest on because if you've thought about how so much has changed in how you run your firm, one of the big areas you've had to consider is technology. So today we have a guest on that has written several articles, has written a book about it, is The Lawyer's Guide to Collaboration and Tools. And so I'm very excited to talk to him because from what I have heard when I talk to different people about, who knows a lot about technology in the legal space, he is one of the names that comes up. So stay tuned for today's episode. So without further ado, let me bring my guest on. Dennis Kennedy, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, and I love that intro. I got to get one like that for myself for the classes I teach. I think that will grab the students' attention right away.
I think that would definitely take the experience to a whole nother. Like, you should do like, I don't know how, like, if you're a big basketball fan, but like back in the 90s when the Chicago Bulls would come out and they'd have like the light show and
Oh
thing. I think
yeah.
if you did that in your classroom, that would be awesome.
The word would probably it'd be not like any other law school class they would have ever taken. But yeah, that would be kind of a cool approach with the lights going dim and then all the lights swirling around. That'd be cool.
Awesome. So I've been looking forward to having you on because I do think a lot of law firms struggle when it comes down to technology and not even just the fact of using the technology, even just trying to develop a way of thinking about how important and how to approach it in their firm. So interested to talk about that. But before we jump into talking about that, can you tell us a little bit about your background for those that aren't familiar with you?
Yeah, so I've been involved in technology law and the practice and the application of technology to law for many years. Wrote the technology column for the ABA Journal, number of books. One of the first lawyers with a website in 1995. One of the first lawyers with a blog. One of the first lawyers with a podcast. So I've done like a number of things in technology, and I started out in the world of estate planning, where I actually implemented document assembly back in, believe it or not, 1990 to automate the drafting of wills, trusts, durable powers of attorney, and the like. And then I shifted my career to technology law, ended up working as in-house counsel as a technology lawyer for MasterCard, and then retired from there. I can say early retired from there, I guess, so I don't give away my age. But and now I've ended up in academia, where I'm currently the director of the Michigan State University Center for Law, Technology, and Innovation, which allows me to do some work in all the areas that have interested me over the years.
Wow, that is quite the journey, quite the history. Now, I'm curious, you mentioned about being one of the first lawyers to have a website. So, when you first started going down that route, I'm sure that the legal industry, from what I heard, is probably as um, resistant to change as the accounting industry can be. So, what was some of the feedback you heard when you first created your website?
So, well, it was like in those early days of the internet, people felt like, oh, this is a fad. It's like the CB radio of the 90s. This is never going to go anywhere. It's not going to have an impact. It's just like such a small area. Um, is it even ethical for lawyers to do this? Like what, all these different things that we, kind of repeat each time a new technology comes into the practice of law, which I'm sure was the case with the telephone and the Pony Express delivery of mail and stuff like that, that lawyers probably objected to that. So I think you see some of the same things, but the same objections, but you also see pioneers out there trying things, and a lot of times they're reacting to what they see that their clients, the help their clients want, the information their clients want to get, and making themselves present in, a new way that is responsive to what their clients want. Because a lot of the internet stuff, even web pages, was, driven by clients who wanted to communicate by email. Same way now, I see a lot more driven by clients who want to interact by, instant messaging in some form or another, which lawyers used to swear they would never do, right? And now is a very common way that many lawyers communicate with clients.
I think that's a very interesting point because, there's so many, I think, changes that are happening so fast that I think that a lot of people are either they're resistant, and then when they finally do get around to it, they don't fully embrace it. So I think as you've been seeing that evolution with technology and how it's impacted law, like even if we talk about like with the websites, like as you started to embrace that over time, did you start to see people who were strong resistors start to say, "Hey, I'll finally get on board"?
Well, I mean, not even just that they would get on board, but it became like a medium that they became really good at. And so a lot of these things with technology, especially what I'll call like the social technology, so the blogging, the podcasting, the web, where you're putting information out there, even Twitter and social media, is that for people who like to communicate, for people who are writers or speakers, that you sometimes find one of those platforms that just really fits you well. Um, and you love it, and you pick up an audience from it, and it's just something that you want to do. And it might have surprised you in the beginning. You're like, I don't see any need for this Twitter stuff or whatever. And then all of a sudden you have all these friends and people think you're an expert, and you're getting, requests to be interviewed and other things like that. So I think that sometimes, as lawyers, we're kind of saying like, oh, what are the risks? What's the potential downside, versus saying, wonder what the potential of this technology is. And so when I teach students, that's one of the things I say is that people aren't coming to you because they want to use what you perceive as the riskiest technology in the history of the world. They're coming to you because it's actually solving a problem they have, and they see a lot of benefit from it. So you need to understand what those benefits are, because that's the way you can give them good advice, because it actually is doing something for them that's very useful, or they're making money from it, or it's the core of their business. And you saw it recently with the NFTs and stuff like that people are going like, oh my God, why would anybody be doing that? It's so risky. And then you have these creators developing like, they're basically creating a living for themselves using these new technologies. And so it's not really good advice to somebody to say like, oh, that's too risky, you shouldn't do it at all, when you go like, no, I have this audience and I'm making money and it has all this potential. So I think that for me, a lot of my work with lawyers is to say like, think about the positives of a new technology, just so you understand, what people see as the potential, and that's going to help you a lot.
Gotcha. I'm curious, as you kind of navigated through your career, like, your own experience with technology to, then getting even deeper into it to ultimately now, leading, from what I have heard from others saying is like, one of the leading, legal technology centers in the country, to where what was that experience like of, after leaving your early retirement to stepping into like, hey, I'm no longer in private practice, I'm going to go into the university sector. What was that transition like?
Well, I started just I got the chance to do a little adjunct teaching in some classes that I wanted to do, and a couple of them that kind of relate to one called entrepreneurial lawyering that relate to some of the topics I know that you talk about on your show. But it was like I knew I wanted to do some teaching, and I had some ideas for some technology related classes, and I got the opportunity to do that. Um, and I love speaking. I love public speaking. So um, combined a couple things, where I could dig into some things that were interesting to me. I could keep it fresh. I could teach a new generation of lawyers, and I got to speak, right? And people paid me to do that. So I was doing the classes, and then the former director left, and I became the interim director, and now I'm the full time director. And so it was like I love what they've been doing at Michigan State with this program over the last probably 10 years, and I can kind of keep it going, build it in some directions, and kind of create some cool opportunities for the school, for the students, for the alumni, and engage in some of my interests, and hopefully have a little fun doing it. So it was like it just kind of fell into my lap. Although I'm like one of those people who say like, well, it fell into my lap after what, like 30, 40 years of preparation for it to fall in my lap.
It's funny how luck tends to work like that. It's like after 40 years of work, I finally got lucky.
Right.
I'm curious, you also talked about, like being one of the, first lawyers to start a blog. And one of the feedbacks that I get from some lawyers about whether it's starting a blog, starting a podcast, or starting a newsletter is, they say, I'm going to run out of stuff to talk about. And I guess, for yourself, it's like you've been running a blog and you've been speaking and you've been teaching for quite a while. Do you ever feel like, hey, you know what? I'm almost at the end of everything that I could write about?
Well, there are days when I think I should be there, and we're at like episode 327, I think, of our podcast. And so Tom Mile and I do a podcast called the Kennedy Mile Road. And the idea was that we were just going to talk about new technologies and new technology topics. And we were just going to do it as a show, and we were going to let it find its audience. And it's like 16 plus years later, and we're still doing it, and we're still coming up with new topics. So I think that it's I've been able to, and as I sort of moved my practice over the years, I mean, part of the thing too was I wanted to kind of align what my work was with what my hobbies and my interests were. And I think that makes it easier. And then also I realized there was a point, maybe like 25 years ago, where I said, one day I said, I've published all these articles and done these things. And I think I've reached a point where I'm not a lawyer who also writes. I think I'm a writer who practices law. And so as they say, once you find your medium, like if people want to do blogging, I say it is really hard if you're not a writer, and also if you're not comfortable like putting what are close to first drafts out, then it's going to be a difficult medium for you. If you're not comfortable being on video, that's super hard. And if you don't like the sound of your voice, podcasting is going to be hard. But if a lot of podcasters like talking to people, and so if they do an interview show, it just can really click for people. And so I think that part of it is that if you're kind of in a medium you like and in an area you like, then the topics kind of come up or people suggest them to you. And that becomes helpful. Or, Tom and I are always trying to get our audience to suggest topics to us. And like once you get that going, and that can really help. But having written columns and articles over the years, it's like I'll just run into something and I go like, oh, that would make a good topic for an article, and I just write it down in my list of potential topics and return to it one day or another. But yeah, I haven't run out of anything. And lately, I think that in the last like 3 months, it feels like this whole generative AI has happened. So things like GPT-3, Dolly 2, where you type in a prompt or words and it generates an image or generates like a written document, and some even do videos. And it seems like that's just like caught on fire in the last 3 months. And I feel like I could spend, a ton of time, writing and talking about that over the next couple of years. In fact, that's one of the areas I'm going to dig into next.
Nice, nice. So now I guess when it comes down to, technology is that it seems like technology is moving faster, or maybe let me say the public messaging, or just the introduction to the public is they're being introduced to technology or new tweaks or new, I guess, facets of technology faster than ever before. Do you ever feel like it just becomes a challenge to keep up with, hey, what are we going to talk about? Like, hey, there's like 100 things we could talk about. How do we narrow it down?
Yeah, I mean, and I think right now it's probably the pace of change and the acceleration of pace of change feels faster right now than it ever has. So if you look back at the beginning of the year, and it was like crypto, NFTs, Web3, like all this stuff. Now there's generative AI, like NFTs, that's old hat, like, oh, you have quantum computing's around the corner, and all these things. So I think that you can, what a lot of lawyers and others struggle with is to say, there's so many things, I can't know them all. And you go like, well, look at how you do your work anyway. There's like a zillion different things, and you become good at certain things that you focus on. To me, technology is something that's similar. So you'd say, like, if I don't understand how something's going to have an impact on my practice, then unless you're just interested in the technology, it probably doesn't make sense to say I'm going to devote a ton of time to that. But there are other things that are going to have an impact. So cybersecurity, can I be more productive? Can I be more efficient? Can I make it easier for people to work with me through collaboration tools? Once you get down to those fundamental questions and you say, there have to be tools out there now because I see them used elsewhere, So one of the things that lawyers struggle with is, like a law firm website where their clients can log on and get access to information. Well, now, especially since the start of COVID, like if you go to your doctor, there's going to be a patient portal, and you can log in and you can see your records, get test results, make appointments, like, ask a quick question of your doctor, all that sort of stuff. And that's the user experience we've all become used to. And lawyers are like, well, I don't know that we want to do that. And it's going to affect, we can't charge people for, making copies of their documents and mailing it to them anymore, those kinds of things. You're like, no, this is the experience that people want. And so I think that the focus comes from saying, what are the things that I need to do? What are my points of friction? What are my points of friction with the clients? And now it used to be, you would say like, oh, I wonder if technology could help. Now you sort of know there has to be some technology out there that works on this stuff. I just need to find it. And part of it's just coming through, looking at what the other related professions are doing and saying, I guess that's possible. Because like once you go, to a patient portal at a doctor's office, you're going like, oh man, I want this, for my law office. And people sometimes ask me about COVID and technology, and I go, I think the big change was not so much technology, but taking credit card payments online. It was like the revolutionary thing that happened. And I had a firm do a little bit of legal work for me this year, and they sent me an invoice, and I looked for the website to pay it with a credit card, and they didn't have it. So I did this thing of like, oh, wait. So I got to go find a checkbook, write a check, find an envelope, find a stamp, do all these things. And so instead of paying the bill on the first day when I got it, like it was like they had to send me a second notice before I was like, okay, I'll find the checkbook, that sort of thing. So, so I look at, those things, and one of my thinking is like, how can I use technology to make it easier for people to work with me? And then also, how can I make it easier for me to do my work? And so I'm always asking these super fundamental questions about technology. And then the hobby side of me is saying like, oh, here's some new technology that looks kind of cool that I could try, like this new AI tools, and I'll do that.
Mhm.
But that's not for everybody.
Yeah.
But that's sort of like where my interests lie.
Awesome. Now, do you have many people who reach out to you and, ask, are there some ethical concerns to certain technology or like, because technology may be moving very fast, but from what I gather from that, the legal industry has a different level of, ethics that have to be applied since they're often dealing with other people's information, other people's money. Do you find that, some people struggle to figure out, hey, how do we ethically use certain technologies?
Well, I think that what you sometimes see, so there is this lawyer's ethical duty of technology competence, which is sort of vague and undefined. And sometimes you hear people say, well, like, I'm worried about this new technology because something might happen. And then they describe the things that could go wrong. And you go like, what do you think of people using a telephone, right? Like you would have been against using a telephone at the beginning because like telephone is like, oh my God, like how many possible things, can go wrong. We're just, like doing a phone call, especially out in public. And so I think it's, you start to think of those things and you say, okay, here's a new technology. How might it come into play? And are there ethical issues? And the ethical issues with technology, as you say, kind of come to confidentiality and other things like
Mhm.
that. And and I'm kind of like, well, you seem really worried about this new technology, but um, lawyers have a terrible, terrible reputation about cybersecurity, and it's a well-deserved terrible reputation. Um, and like, don't we need to focus on the nuts and bolts of these technologies before we start to say like, oh, in the future this AI might do something horrible and like release all, like open this up to hacking or release confidential information or send out a document with the metadata still visible, and you go like, you know, man, the humans have been doing that. They've been doing that on a regular basis. So let's kind of get back to basics. And you might, I just taught a class called cybersecurity and data protection, and I just feel that this, just getting to the basics of cybersecurity is going to be one of those things that distinguishes lawyers and law firms in the next few years. So I think there's a lot of things to pick from, and sometimes it's just like, uh, question came up in my class last night, like, well, what if we just said people can't use TikTok anymore, or they can't use certain technologies? And I'm like, okay, how do you think that's going to happen? Like, what would that look like? Or can we really say that some new technology, we're going to say it can't come in? So it's kind of like we have to look at these things and say our role as lawyers is to figure out, what are the issues, what are the risks, how would we use it for ourselves and for our clients? And it becomes like anything else that's new in law to me. So I mean, that's where I always come out. I always surprises me when lawyers say, I went to law school because I didn't want to do math anymore, or I didn't want to do science, that sort of thing. I see lawyers, take on completely new cases, new areas of law, new types of things, and they're totally confident about it. But you go like, hey, here's an iPhone. They're going like, whoa, like, man, I can't learn that. And so it's really interesting, like, that for some reason for a lot of lawyers, and I don't know whether it's the math thing or the science thing, but they just seem to have this real concern about technology, when to me it's just like, as lawyers we're equipped to be lifetime learners, and this is just like one more thing that you can learn. You just don't have to learn it all. Just figure out what makes the most sense, and then and then you learn who to ask for the stuff you don't know.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I know when you were talking about the telephone, one of the immediate examples came to mind is when I guess when like cordless phones started becoming a thing, and it happened a couple of times, where I would be on the phone and then all of a sudden there'd be like this strange voice that comes in, and I'm like hearing the stranger's conversation. And I think, the times that I remember, it was a guy who lived in New York. Now, I grew up in South Carolina, so it's like I would hear this guy in New York come on. I'm like, why do I hear like his phone? Why are our wires getting crossed?
Well, and in the early days of mobile phones, like if you're in an airport, oh my God, the lawyers would just be talking away on the phone, and they're talking too loud, right? Because they're on this phone, they're not sure anybody can hear them. And so they're talking about like all this. You just want to go like, hey, probably your client, who I can kind of figure out who it might be, probably would not be happy with you having this conversation here in the, in the waiting area at the airport with like 200 people listening to it, so, so I think that sometimes it's like, let's step back and kind of, I sometimes say, compared to what? So people go like, oh, what if we tried to have like artificial intelligence make decisions for us, like in certain types of cases? And people go like, oh, what if they made a mistake? What if there was like some kind of bias in the AI? And you want to go like, hey, look at the existing court system and the judges, like compared to that, like we know there's already issues there, so like how do we do that? And then I remember once I was at a CLE conference and somebody was talking about encryption and cybersecurity, and there's a lawyer raised his hand and said, I hear this stuff and it's like too much, and I just want to say, like, what's wrong with the plain old U.S. mail? And I was like, I understand like where he's coming from, but when you say, here's the system of communication that's like paper within paper, that goes into a box. There's no way of tracking it. It can get wet. It can catch on fire. Like all these things. It's not like email has suddenly like up the level of risk to something. Because you're like you don't know where it's going to come the next day or 3 days later or whatever. And I'm like, you just kind of need to kind of think through these things, and then once you do that, I think you can start to make good decisions about technology. And and then one of my ongoing themes with technology is how can I use technology to make it easier for people to work with me, and that becomes a framework of how I personally look at technologies and evaluate new things.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up, a couple more questions. Now I want to talk a little bit about, the book, because a lot of lawyers are trying to figure out technology, or they just need some type of framework to help them to start thinking about it effectively. So they're not like just spinning their wheels in this place where they just get stuck. So the lawyer's guide to, that you just, I guess it came out a couple months ago. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Tom and I wrote this book first wrote in 2008, The Lawyer's Guide to Collaboration Tools and Technologies, and this will be the third edition of it. And we said, there's this thing that's happening, cloud computing, and people are working together using technologies with more and more sophistication, and it's more and more common. So people just need a guide to what's out there and how to think about it. So we try to do two things in the book. One is kind of give you an overview of the types of tools that are out there and maybe some of the ones to consider. But we also are trying to give you frameworks and questions to ask to say, like, how do I think this through? Like, do I need this? If I do need this, how do I make a decision about it? would I do something as wildly radical as like sending out a survey to my best clients and say, what technology do you use? How would you prefer to communicate with us, and things like that? And like, oh my God, people's minds are blown, and which is when you find out that you have clients who want to do instant messaging or other things like that. And you can make them happy. And then you can also start to address some of those issues. So that's the idea of the book. And we updated it from with the lessons from COVID. So people are working at home. What's new that's out there? Has this gotten easier? I think it has in a lot of ways. And then the big issue, I think, we're trying to get people, like I said, to focus on what's important to them, because in certain categories of legal software, you could have 200 choices these days. And there's a lot of change out there, and that could just be super overwhelming, and people are looking for advice and what they can do. And I I sometimes say this stuff isn't really rocket science. That when you have 200 choices, you probably, it's not a bad way to go to pick one of the top three, right? And and so you're doing a different type of due diligence. And you're also in these areas where the programs are, the services are going to evolve. Things are going to change, your needs are going to change. So you can waste a lot of time looking for a perfect solution when there's a whole bunch of things that will be more than adequate for what you need. And then that's sort of my philosophy. And I think that's why people like listen to me talk about technology. And what I write about technology is I'm like super practical and like, hey, this is not too hard. Here's how to think about it. Don't get bogged down in like all this technical stuff that you don't understand, because you're probably not going to understand it. Think about what it is that you want to accomplish, and does this tool help you accomplish that?
Awesome. So if people are interested in finding you online, where should they be looking for you?
Well, I was joking with you earlier that I since we're recording this at the end of November, I don't know what's going to happen with Twitter, so I don't know whether I should give my Twitter handle. But basically, in most things, I'm Dennis Kennedy, one word. But so I'm DennisKennedy.com is my website, which has been around for a long time. My blog is there, and other things I'm doing, and then. The other place that I use a lot is LinkedIn, because with Allison Shields Joes, I've co-written a book on LinkedIn for lawyers. So LinkedIn is another place I use, and it's easy to find me there just by searching on it. And in between those things, you'll find access to most everything I do. And the podcast is on something called the Legal Talk Network, and it's called the Kennedy Mile Report. And Tom Mile is Mighell. And we like calling it the Kennedy Mile Report because it helps people learn to pronounce his name. Because most people get it wrong unless they've heard it a couple of times. So that's how you find me. And I'm always experimenting with like new social media and other things. I don't know that you're ever going to find me with much of a presence on TikTok, but that's something I was looking into earlier this year.
Gotcha. Well, before we wrap up, if you were talking to someone and said, "Hey, I was on the Law and Finance show with Terrell Turner, and we had a great conversation, and if you should go back and listen to the episode that I did with Terrell, and hey, here are two big takeaways you should keep from that conversation." What would your two big takeaways be?
Well, one is like, don't, see yourself as a lifetime learner, and compare the things that you've done as a lawyer in learning new things, and then ask yourself, why is that not translatable to technology, or why do I think that's not translatable to technology? And then I also think the second thing is to get super focused on the basics, to say like, what is this going to do for me? What am I trying to accomplish? There's this notion of jobs to be done. So like, what is the job I'm trying to do here with this technology? Sometimes I like to say, what am I hiring this technology to do for me? And if I can answer that really clearly, then I'll make really good choices on technology. And then, look at the outcomes, so I'm always focused on outcomes. If I can add a third one that was one of my learnings today is get a great, totally cool rocking intro like you have. That's my takeaway. I got to get me one of those. But this has been so fun, so much fun. You're so great to talk to. And great questions and a lot of fun. And I hope you get tons of listeners, because I think you're going to have like a really great show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hey, thanks for coming on. If you're looking for ideas on how to manage and grow a profitable law firm, this Facebook group is perfect for you, because every week we are featuring conversations with successful lawyers and businesses related to law firms on tips, ideas, and technology that are helping many people grow and manage a profitable law firm. So if you're looking for great tips and ideas, you definitely want to click the link below so you can join the conversation and be part of the Law Firms and Finance Facebook group.